Angular component is made up of 8 lifecycle hooks that come into execution when that component tries to communicate with another component. A component in Angular has 8 lifecycle hooks. Angular takes the responsibility of creating and rendering the component and its children, checking its data bound properties and destroying the component. So the properties that are bound, like in the last example we have seen where the property binding and @input decorator which we applied on a property. In such a case, ng on changes is a lifecycle hook that comes into execution. Likewise, we have other lifecycle hooks that come into execution at a particular phase in the life cycle of a component. And one other point to note over here is these 4 lifecycle hooks, as the name says, content, view, they belong to only component, but they does not apply to a directive, and the rest other they apply to both directive and a component. So we'll continue with the last example wherein we saw a parent component passing some information to a child component. In such a case, how ng on changes comes into execution in the next example. We'll modify the previous example and then we'll see how ng on changes will come into execution. So continuing with the last example, let me improve it by having a text box. So my intention is to have a text box over here, a parent component text box, and when I type something in the text box on an event like key down.enter, when that event happens, that text should come over here. Now it is only a hard-coded value, but let us try to improve the same. So I'd like to place text box next to parent component. So here I'll say input type equal to text, and when this event happens, like I'd like to call a function on pass, and we have been using $event to pass the event that has happened on it. And in component 1, I'll take the method on pass and I'll receive the event, and we know that event dot target dot value gives the value that is typed in the text box. This I'll assign to component 1 property. With this, the value given in text box has come to the component 1 property. Now the same I need to pass to the component 2 property and display it in component 2. So I'll save this. Let's type something and press enter. Now see the value that I've typed, which is in parent component, that same value I receive in child component. When such a thing happens, wherein you pass a value from parent component to child component, we have Angular hooks that come into picture. Angular hooks. There are 8 lifecycle hooks given by Angular. ng on changes, ng on init, do, check. These are some lifecycle hooks that come into execution at particular time in the life cycle of a component. So whenever we pass a value or change happens to the property, like if there is a change in here, then in the child component a lifecycle hook called as ng on changes, and that we get it from on changes, and this mandates me to implement on changes lifecycle hook. Okay. I'll have a comma over here, space, on changes lifecycle hook. I'll have console log in which I'll say in component 2 on changes, and I'll save this. We already have this come into execution, but still when I type in something and press enter, you see in component 2 on changes. Again I try to press enter, but it doesn't come into picture. It comes into execution only when a change happens. Whenever there is a change, only then the on changes lifecycle hook comes into execution. So to describe what on changes lifecycle does, this is a lifecycle that comes into picture only when there is a change in the parent property while passing it to the child. Only then on changes lifecycle hook comes into picture. And we'll have a detailed look on ng on changes. Now in an example we have seen a component, the parent component is able to pass information to the child component, and when that is happening we get the ng on changes coming into execution. So what we'll see is, instead of having a text box, this time we'll have a button and a click event on it. We'll call on click, then we'll close the button, we'll name it as click, and we'll write the method. We do not need this for this example. I'll say on click, and I'll comment this one as well, but I'll say component 1 property of type number or equal to 3, and then I'll say this dot component 1 property plus plus, and this is a change. Whenever I click on the button, the change happens, and this change I would like to get it in the child component and display it in child component property as a property. I'll save all. Now if you see, this is 3 initially. On every click the number changes, 7, 8 and so on, and I can do an initialization as well, equal to 9. I'll save this, and on a click 3 becomes 9. So a change to that property is calling the ng on changes lifecycle. An assignment to the property is also calling ng on changes lifecycle hook. Now I'll make the same as an array. And I'll have that incremented. Now when trying to increment this, and a click will not do any changes, you don't see the incrementation is not happening. If I initialize it like or 9, I'm doing the initialization. I'll save this and observe when I click on it, you see the initialization happened. So when it comes to scalar data type like single digit 3 being assigned to component 1, ng on changes comes into execution, but when it comes to an array, a collection of data, ng on changes did not come into execution when it is the case of a change in it, but a reinitialization has called ng on changes. So that's a point to observe here. Next point to learn in ng on changes is simple changes. But before I move on to simple changes, the one that is not possible, a change in the array which is not possible when it comes to ng on changes, this can be achieved in another life cycle called as do check, that we'll see. But before that, we'll finish this video by understanding what simple changes are. Now to understand simple changes, let me revert to the previous example wherein we were having a text box. I'll save everything. And you type something, and yes, this is the example, and we'll see simple changes in this example. So ng on changes takes an argument also, which is like changes, and the type is simple changes, Angular code. And the purpose of using simple changes is to track the current and previous values of the parent data coming in. So we can get it by using a for let change in changes, and then we do console log. I'll give current value, and you say changes of change dot current value. Similarly, console log previous changes of change dot previous value. Now when I save it, TSLint error, not a problem, and we come in over here, and current value is component 1 value, the default hard-coded value what we have done. Previous value is undefined. I'll clear this off. Now I say Kiran and enter. So current value is Kiran, previous value is component 1 value. Now I say Kumar and enter. So the current value is Kumar, previous value is 1. Or we can simply pass 1, 2, 3. So this way you can track the current and previous changes using simple changes.